So this movie is on calculating and formatting the values that are within the pivot table. We're going to begin by looking at the number formatting options that we have. And then we're going to look at the field settings dialog box, which enables us to summarize the values in various different ways, like counting, summing, finding the product of, the variance, standard deviation, and so on. And the field settings dialog box also has functionality that allows us to show those numbers as a comparison of something else, like a percentage of the grand total, for instance. So we're back in Excel, and we've got the data that I've been sort of dragging along in these pivot table movies, and I've added a column, the discount dollars. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. And we're going to create a pivot table, of course, by left-clicking a cell within the data region, going to the Insert tab, left-clicking Pivot Table in the Tables group, and I'm going to again make a pivot table in the existing worksheet beginning at cell J6. Left-clicking OK. So we've covered a couple of different ways to get fields down to the drop-down zones, but there is yet one more, and that's right-clicking the field in the field list and then left-clicking where you want it to drop down to. And of course we can check the checkbox, and for values they'll be dropped down to the values drop-down zone. And again, I can check and create two sums of those values, the gross price and the discount dollars. So the pivot table is drawn using the general format for these numbers, and it displays them in a way that's consistent, but it looks inconsistent because the sum of discount has values to the right of the decimal place, and the sum of gross price is an integer. So we can fix that, but first I'm going to go through and show you the different ways to access this functionality. You can left-click the down arrow to get a shortcut menu for each of the fields in the field value drop zone. Left-click field value settings, and then left-click number format, and there it is. You can right-click into the cell and access the number format directly, which is probably the best way to do it. Or if you just like to click your mouse, you can get the field value settings and then left-click the number format. And finally, you can left-click the field value settings in the active field list on the Options tab and then left-click number format. So what we want to do is convert the format of these numbers to currency. I'm going to left-click OK and left-click OK again. And we have to work with each one of the fields separately. So I'm going to get the shortcut menu by right-clicking that cell and convert it to the currency format so we have a consistent look for both of those fields. So in addition to formatting the numbers, there's a lot of other things we can do with these numbers. And this functionality is accessible in one of actually 5 ways. Some of these ways are less direct than others, but we can get the shortcut menu by left-clicking the field in the Values drop-down zone, left-click Value Field Settings to get that dialog box, and the functionality I'm talking about is to summarize values by and show values as. I'm going to cancel that. We can also get the Value Fields dialog box by left-clicking that option in the shortcut menu. I'm going to close that, but we can access this functionality directly in the shortcut menu. And when I hover over Summarize Values By, Excel gives me a list of the common ways to summarize those values. But if you need a summarization methodology that's not on that list, you can left-click More Options and get the Value Field Settings dialog box. I'm going to close that again. Right-click to get the shortcut menu, and the other set of options are right there. And of course, that functionality is also accessible by left-clicking the field settings in the active field group on the Options tab. And I'm going to close that, and we're going to go to one more place, which is in the Calculations group. We can summarize the values by, we get that list. And of course, we can click More Options to get the Value Field Settings dialog box. I'm going to close that and show values as. There's our list again, and More Options brings us that dialog box again. So this functionality is available and accessible almost wherever you are when you're working on a pivot table. So summarize values by. These are different aggregating methods. The default for numerical fields, unless there's a blank cell in your data, will be to sum the values. If there's a blank cell, Excel will count the values. And you can choose to count the values, of course, by selecting it. You can average the values, find the maximum, the minimum, the product. You can count the numbers, find the standard deviation, and the variance. I'm going to leave it at the default, which is sum. And we're going to go to the other tab in this dialog box and look at the calculation options, where we can have these values expressed as some function of another value. And I'm not going to do all of them, but we can do a couple of them here. We can choose to show the sum of the discount as a percentage of the grand total. When I do that, I get the percent of the grand total. Each of those three percentages equal 100%, and the grand total has been converted to 100% instead of the total sum of all of the discounts granted. Going to the shortcut menu by right-clicking the cell, I'm going to hover over Show Values As to get that list again. It's a little bit more accessible this way. We can instead show those discounts as a difference from, and in this case, the default is the salesperson, Mike. And if we're going to show a difference from this data point, for Mike, that difference is going to be 0. Jimmy granted more discounts than Mike did, and Rob granted less. That's probably due to the function of the sales volume. And right-clicking one more time to get the shortcut menu, Show Values As. We can also show these values in terms of how they rank against one another. Left-clicking that, smallest to largest. For the salespeople, Rob had the lowest amount of sales, Mike came in second, and Jimmy was first. When you rank them from smallest to largest, they're ranked in that order, 1, 2, and 3. So that's pivot table formatting and calculation options. We began by looking at formatting the numbers in the pivot table. That functionality is accessible in a number of different ways. Some of those ways include pulling up the Field Settings dialog box, which provides access to some other functionality which allows us to change the summarization method for the pivot table. And in addition to that, we also have options to show those values as a function of something else. As a percentage of the grand total, for instance, we can compare the values in the pivot table against other values and find the difference from. We can rank the values, and there are many other options that we didn't display but nevertheless are available to us.